Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 172. Radical Acceptance. You excited, kiddo? Have you ever been camping before? Well, I guess it's more glamping than camping, but that's my preference anyway. Mike chatted at him from the hall as he put the last of his toiletries into his bag. I've been, urban camping, I guess, he answered, biting down on a smirk. Mike half laughed and half scoffed with a horrified look on his face. Oh my God, Izuku! What the hell did you say to him? Eraser asked from the living room, though his words had no bite. Mike turned so he wasn't blocking the conversation with Izuku to his right and Eraser to the left. I asked him if he'd been camping before, and he said he'd been urban camping, they explained. Eraser stopped and looked at him before taking in a deep breath and letting it out as a sigh. His hand had gone up to scrub at his stubble, but when he let it down, Izuku could see an old, familiar, forced straightness to his lips. He almost started laughing before Eraser said anything at all. You're always on about being more optimistic. I'd say he's gone plus ultra with that advice. Eraser deadpanned back at them. I'm not going to miss either of you, Mike announced as Izuku broke down into a fit of laughter. Things had been better like this lately. Ever since the mall incident, trademark, he had let himself fall into an old persona like a pair of well-worn boots, and Eraser had fallen right back into it with him. Well, at least until he told him he had to chill out and forced him to go to therapy. He tried not to think about that part. They weren't the same as they used to be, not by a long shot, but there was a tentative spark of something. Good. We'll just take the train to save you the drive then. Eraser shot back with a smirk. Mike's face scrunched up into a theatrical frown, and for someone who was so afraid of spiders, they ran over and latched themselves to Eraser's front in an incredibly spider-like fashion. Though maybe it only looked so spider-like because the man was 80% limbs. Eraser hardly even moved an inch as it happened, leading Izuku to believe this wasn't an especially uncommon occurrence. He laughed again as Eraser made his way to the kitchen and started the coffee maker as if a full-grown man wasn't hanging off of him like a koala. Keep laughing and you'll be next, Eraser threatened. Izuku zipped his lips quickly. He didn't think he could take a present Mike tackle hug as well as Eraser had. No, the man was a full head taller than him. That would almost certainly end up with someone busting their skull on the floor. Eraser managed to peel Mike off of him at some point before breakfast, and they insisted on driving them to UA. Izuku bid him goodbye before he got out of the car, but Mike wasn't having it. You're not getting out of a hug that easily, they said in a playfully threatening tone as they got out of the car as well. He looked at Eraser with a slightly concerned expression. I've learned there's no point fighting it, he shrugged as he started pulling their luggage out of the trunk. Izuku snorted out a laugh and rolled his eyes. He'd seen Eraser draped over Mike on the couch more times than he'd seen Mike tackle hug Eraser. So he's sure the burden wasn't as unbearable for Eraser as he was making it seem. Before he could even refocus his eyes after rolling them at Eraser, Mike already had his surprisingly strong arms around his middle. He was picked up and spun around like he weighed no more than a particularly delicate down pillow. And he blamed the undignified squawk he let out on Mike entirely. He could hear Eraser laughing quietly, and he awkwardly returned the hug once his feet met solid ground again. I lied. I'm going to miss you both so much. Mike sobbed theatrically. We'll be back in a week, Sashi. Would you let him go? You're going to suffocate him. Eraser replied dryly. Fine, fine. Mike relented. Izuku tried to subtly shuffle away and failed epically. Sorry, kiddo. That was a little overzealous. I just love you to bits and I'm gonna miss you, Mike explained, and Izuku's brain short circuited. He froze for longer than he'd care to admit. Did they just say, "You're gonna give him an aneurysm"? Eraser chastised. Sorry. I didn't mean. Well, no, I did mean it, but that was probably a lot. Sorry, I'll just. They cut themselves off by miming zipping their lips shut and making an impressively accurate zipper noise, which got muffled halfway through. He glanced over at Eraser again as if he was going to give a hint as to what the hell Izuku was supposed to do, but he was already looking at him. He opened his mouth to say something. Anything, but nothing came out. Let's just pretend I didn't say anything. It's all right. Group hug, and then I'll get out of your hair? Mike offered awkwardly. Eraser gave Mike a fond, long-suffering smile and obliged. Izuku just let it happen and held on to Mike a little longer once Eraser stepped back. Izuku didn't say anything, but he patted them on the back before walking over to the trunk to pick up his luggage. Mike gave them both a big smile and waved them off as they walked through the door and out of the parking garage. The door swung shut behind him and they walked down the hall in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Eraser spoke up. He meant what he said. We both do. We're a family now. A weird one, but one nonetheless. It comes with the package. I know it's strange, but you'll get used to it. That or Zashi will die trying. I need to grab some stuff from Nedzu. Why don't you go meet up with your classmates at the bus? I'll join you shortly. Eraser dismissed him curtly, blessedly leaving him alone with his unruly emotions. He stopped in the bathroom for a few minutes to pull himself together before following Eraser's instructions and making his way to the front of the building where the bus was set to pick them up. As was to be expected, Ida and Yaoyorozu were already there, even though they weren't scheduled to meet for another half hour. The rest of the class joined them slowly, and thankfully, no one was late. Yaoyorozu called roll, and when everyone was thoroughly counted for, they filed onto the bus. Though he rarely rode the bus for school since he walked, he was in the habit of sitting toward the front if he could. He was less likely to be harassed when the bus driver was so close. He didn't need to do that anymore, but old habits die hard. With Eraser being the driver, he didn't mind the front anyways. Hitoshi sat down next to him looking more exhausted than usual, and Izuku wasn't surprised when he promptly fell asleep against the window. Ida was in the aisle seat next to him, with Uraraka passed out on his shoulder, which looked a great deal more comfortable. Hitoshi was probably going to have a bruise on the side of his head with how much the bus shook around as they drove along. Todoroki was behind them, sitting next to Tokiyami, and they both appeared to be sleeping while sitting perfectly upright. Honestly, Izuku wouldn't put it past either of them. Needless to say, the front of the bus was pretty quiet, so he passed the time looking out the windows and watching the city streets fade into suburbia and then to rugged mountains. It was beautiful, something he'd only ever really seen in pictures. 2 hours whizzed by in the blink of an eye before Eraser announced that they were making a pit stop. Everyone lazily blinked the sleep out of their eyes, and as the bus pulled over, Izuku noted that there was no rest stop in sight. There was, however, another car waiting for them. He did not have a good feeling about this. There was nothing but a sheer drop-off and seemingly unending forest to either side of them. So whatever they were in for hinged on whoever was in that car. Why are we stopping here? There isn't even anywhere to covertly piss, Hitoshi marked privately as he shuffled off the bus behind Izuku. Izuku shot him a grimace and looked pointedly at the car that was here to meet them and then out over the wide expanse of forest. Oh, I'm not gonna like this, am I? Are they gonna make us walk the rest of the way? Is it too late to get back on the bus? Hitoshi groaned. I don't think even the bus can save us. he replied when he saw Pixie Bob from the Wild Wild Pussycats get out of the car. Eraser was looking over at the two of them with a smirk on his face, no doubt having overheard their conversation. Izuku mouthed the word sadist at him and watched as he tucked the bottom half of his face into his capture weapon to hide the smirk that had no doubt graced his lips. It seemed like only 2 of the 4 pussycats were here to greet them. Pixie Bob and Mandalay were introducing themselves, and he knew it was rude to talk while they were addressing the group, but he really would prefer to be in one piece by the end of this, so he pulled Uraraka close enough to whisper, "Hey, Uraraka, can you make as many of us float as you can, like ASAP? I have a feeling we're about to take a tumble." Izuku asked casually, but looked pointedly at the cliff, then Pixie Bob, then Eraser, making his way back toward the bus without prompting them to follow. She followed his gaze, and her eyes widened before she ran around the group, slapping as many people as she could. "Oh, the kiddies are wise to our schemes. How forward-thinking. Well, if you're ready to get started so soon, who am I to stop you?" Pixie Bob cheered as she planted her palms to the earth. As the ground started to shift beneath his feet, which were no longer touching the ground, he noticed a little kid waiting off to the side by the car. He wondered what that was about for a moment, but other matters quickly became more pressing. "Everyone, hold on to each other!" Uraraka shouted as the ground gave way. Thankfully, Uraraka had gotten around to almost everyone but herself and used her weight to drag the group down much more gently than they would have otherwise. The only other person who didn't seem to be in zero gravity was Katsuki, and Izuku almost laughed out loud when he realized that. It was incredibly petty, but it turned out for the best, as Kachan's group had been off on their own and didn't get the chance to link with the rest of the group that Uraraka had dragged down with her. Katsuki's weight pulled them down halfway before he slapped Kirishima's hand off of him and used his explosions to cushion his fall. Thankfully, Sero was able to pull them safely to the ground without Katsuki's help. "Good thinking, Uraraka. That wouldn't have been a pleasant drop," Yaoyorozu said as she smoothed out the non-existent creases in her skirt. "Oh, don't thank me. Thank Midoriya. I would have fallen too if he hadn't warned me," Uraraka deflected. "Oh, I wasn't," he tried to dismiss, but was cut off. "What the frick is that?" Kaminari shouted. He was standing closest to the trees and pointed up at, well, he's pretty sure he had heard Mandalay call this the Beast's Forest. It seemed like an apt descriptor, and that was definitely a beast. Koda tried to use his quirk to divert the creature's aggression, but Enna voice only worked on animals, and this was no animal. "It's Pixie Bob's quirk. It's just a golem. Destroy it," Izuku instructed the group closer to the trees. Kachan, for once in his life, wasted no time in following directions. He blasted the thing's head clear off, and it crumpled to the ground in a pile of loose dirt. But, like a hydra, 2 more came to take its place. Izuku made his way toward the closest one, and as he looked up at the beast in front of him, he felt a smile split across his face. Pixie Bob's control over her quirk was nothing short of awesome. And since these beasts weren't sentient in any way, the only reason he had to hold back was to spare his bones and the trees around them. This is going to be fun. He spent the day crushing the golems, suggesting combo moves for his classmates, and watching them come up with their own. He was having so much fun that he almost forgot how exhausting it was. Almost. They didn't get back to camp until well past a reasonable lunchtime, like the Pussycats had projected, though he could have predicted that. Even just walking that far would have taken them more than 3 hours, and the golems had slowed them down another 2. It was closer to dinner than lunch now, and though he was used to pushing through persistent hunger pangs, most of his classmates were not. When they finally breached the trees, he noticed the same kid from earlier standing off to the side again. Izuku would have wondered if he knew this kid and had forgotten horrifically wronging him in the past with the way he was scowling, but he was scowling at everyone equally, not just Izuku. The Pussycats congratulated them on getting here so quickly, but Izuku ignored them in favor of watching Kirishima attempt to talk to the kid and get punched in the jewels for his efforts. Yikes. He was kind of impressed that Kirishima didn't instinctively activate his quirk to protect himself. His quick thinking saved the brat's knuckles, no doubt. That, or he had just completely not expected it. Izuku chose to believe the former, though. Kirishima was kind and usually had pretty fast reflexes, so it was plausible. I know you're all hungry, but you got here faster than we thought you would, so dinner isn't ready yet, but it will be out soon. We won't be cooking for you again, so go rest while you can, Mandalay warned and dismissed them before presumably returning to the kitchen. Half of his classmates dropped where they stood, lying on the ground rather than walking the extra 50 yards to the outdoor dining area. He didn't blame them. He was exhausted too, now that he had stopped moving long enough to realize it. He looked over to Todoroki and shrugged before joining Hitoshi on the ground, laying on his back with his hands behind his head to cushion it. The view of the stars must be brilliant out here once the sun goes down. That was something he had never seen before. He hadn't been out of the city since he was 3 to go to his grandfather's funeral. Not that he really remembered it all that well. They all stayed there in relative silence until the breeze blew in the right direction and the smells, wafting from the kitchen, made their way over. Izuku chuckled as a few people groaned about how good it smelled and how hungry they were. Thankfully, it didn't take long for their host to announce that dinner was served, and at that point, no one had a problem with the 50-yard walk to the table. He was surprised how quickly they mobilized, given how visibly exhausted they were. Izuku took a seat at the end of a table with Hitoshi next to him and Todoroki across. Everyone had grabbed seats so quickly that Ida and Uraraka ended up cut off from the group, sitting a little further down with Sero, Ashido, Kaminari, and Kirishima between them. Mito, thank you so much, Ashido said between mouthfuls of food. That would have taken 3 times longer without you. He had his chopsticks raised halfway to his mouth, and his food fell from between them right back down to his plate in surprise. You're being dramatic. Barely... You're too humble, Mito. We all would have eaten dirt if you didn't warn us right at the beginning. You too, Uraraka. Sarah interrupted him. Yeah, and I wouldn't have thought to do half the things you said. You made us way more efficient, man. Kirishima added. Take the compliment and eat, dude. Kaminari drove their point home through a mouthful of rice, nearly choking on it. Do not speak with food in your mouth. It is dangerous and impolite. Ida chastised him. Izuku stuffed his mouth as well, just so he wouldn't be expected to respond to anyone. Oh, I'm so ready for that hot spring, but this food is so good. Uraraka groaned through a mouthful of karage. Ida looked about ready to blow a gasket, but he had food in his mouth, so, as per his own instructions, he couldn't tell her off. Hitoshi laughed at his predicament, but Izuku was doing his best to keep his shoulders from dropping, like one of those full-body frowns Mike always did. He had forgotten about the hot spring. He couldn't lie and say that the hike hadn't taken the wind out of his sails. The thought of a nice warm bath to ease all his aching muscles sounded divine. But he couldn't. The day at the pool had been bad enough. Kaminari had asked if he was trying to keep his skin fair to match his pretty hair. He knew he didn't mean anything by it, but pointing out the clear difference between him and his peers did not feel good. Getting into a hot spring with full coverage suit at night would be so much worse. It just wasn't an option. And the alternative was somehow even worse than that. No, he'd be getting a quick shower in at most, depending on whether the showers had curtains. He hated this. You okay, Greenie? Hitoshi muttered subtly to his left. He just sighed and shrugged. You know, you could just go with us, right? I'll tell anyone who says anything to shut the hell up, he offered. Izuku smiled at that, but shook his head. Says anything about what? Todoroki butted in. A-B conversation, Roki. See your way out of it. Hitoshi answered. Todoroki took a second to understand the joke, but he huffed out a laugh once he did. Apologies, he replied, still smiling. It's fine. Izuku dismissed the apology. Todoroki nodded and went back to his food, but Izuku couldn't help but watch the way his smile scrunched up the scar tissue on his left cheek differently than it did the smooth skin on his right. Does anyone ever ask you about that? Your scar, I mean, he asked quietly before he could think better of it. Not often. Children do more frequently than others, he answered easily. Izuku had to hold back a cringe. He could imagine Todoroki trauma dumping on some poor, curious 8-year-old. As tactless as that approach was, he couldn't help but envy Todoroki's ability to not give a shit about what people thought about him. Why? Todoroki pressed. Hitoshi exchanged a brief glance with him when they asked, Do you want me to tell him to mind his own business? Izuku shook his head and answered the question himself. I have some scars. I try to keep them covered up, but he explained just barely loud enough for Todoroki to hear before he trailed off. Oh, the hot spring. I understand. I will also tell anyone who says anything to shut the hell up. Todoroki answered as easy as breathing. His brashness was unexpected. Both he and Hitoshi ended up laughing. Why is that funny? Todoroki asked. It's not. It's really sweet. I just didn't expect it. I'll think about it, Izuku replied, and was surprised to find that he actually meant it. Evening turned into night as they finished helping their host clean and put away the dishes, all the while being reminded that they'd better pay attention because they wouldn't be helping them like this again. Izuku got the feeling this was about to be one of the longest weeks of his life if today was what they considered a break. Sure, the first month of All Might's plan was worse, but this was still pretty brutal. Once all of the dishes were done and they were shown around the place, it was finally time for him to make a damn decision. Everyone filed into the changing rooms and he started to follow, but just before the door, he stopped. Todoroki and Hitoshi stopped with him and didn't say a word. They just stood and waited for him to choose. After a minute, he looked up and caught Hitoshi's eye. Hitoshi shot him a sad smile and nodded his head in the direction of the door that he couldn't seem to make himself go through, silently encouraging him forward. He took a deep breath and steeled himself before pressing on. He could have wept with joy at the sight of the private shower stalls. He really didn't want to take a half-assed shower after everything they did today. He was covered in dirt and stale sweat. I'm gonna take a long shower. I could meet you guys out there. He tried to dismiss them. We'll wait. I'm filthy anyway. I could use a long shower as well. Todoroki stood firm. Oh, okay, he answered dumbly. Hitoshi just shrugged and made his way to one of the showers. Izuku luxuriated in the shower for longer than he had in years, but when he heard the last of the shower heads turn off, he figured he couldn't keep his friends waiting forever. He knew they were too stubborn to leave him here. He dried off and resisted the temptation to just throw his clothes back on and run away. With a towel wrapped around his waist and a shaky hand, he pushed the curtain aside and stepped out into the changing room, feeling more exposed than he ever had in his entire life. Hitoshi and Todoroki were there waiting for him, and he did his best to ignore the way their eyes lingered on his chest for a split second before he looked down self-consciously. "Those are burns," Todoroki noted, pulling Izuku's attention back up. His features were set firmly in something that Izuku couldn't quite read under his own panic. "The person who did it is dead already," Hitoshi replied for him. Hitoshi was much easier to read. His tone and facial expression were clear. He was furious. Whatever expression Todoroki had on his face settled slightly at Hitoshi's words, but it didn't disappear completely. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't." He tried to back out, but Hitoshi wasn't having it. "No, Izuku, it's fine. Our reactions aren't your responsibility, and neither is anyone else's. You deserve to relax more than any of us. We'll tell everyone to piss off, and you'll ignore them, okay?" Hitoshi rested what was meant to be an encouraging hand on his shoulder, but Izuku flinched away from it. He wasn't used to physical contact without a barrier. Katsuki hadn't even touched him directly to leave the burn he'd left there. Izuku had to pick out the crumbling bits of melted polyester that had separated them. "Sorry," Hitoshi apologized and pulled his hand away quickly. No, it's fine. I'm fine." Izuku dismissed his concern poorly. "Let's just, go." He stepped around them and made his way towards the door to the hot spring with a single-minded focus. He needed to get out there and into the water as quickly as possible, and hopefully, no one saw him at all. Of course, nothing ever goes as he hopes it will. By the time he settled down in the water, everyone's eyes were on him. He heard Todoroki and Hitoshi get in behind him, and he tried to focus on that, but everyone was still staring at him. It felt like they had been looking for hours, but he knew it could only have been a matter of seconds. "What the hell happened to you, Mito bro?" Sato broke the tense silence. Shoji punched him none too gently in the arm before Izuku's guard dogs got the chance to attack, and Kirishima took the initiative to awkwardly continue the conversation his group had been having before Izuku had violently grabbed everyone's attention. Through his panic, Izuku noticed that Shoji still had his mask on despite the steam undoubtedly being well on its way to waterboarding him. He didn't ask why. His mind was drifting somewhere nearby, but he didn't quite have a grasp on it at the moment. Thankfully, Todoroki and Hitoshi didn't try to talk to him. He noticed Katsuki get out of the pool and walk away without a word, and he could have sworn his expression looked an awful lot like grief, but he dismissed it as his mind playing tricks on him. Things slowly settled down, but he still waited until everyone left before he dared let his shoulders back above the water. He was probably pretty close to heat stroke at this point, but his muscles felt so much better. He was exhausted, and he hoped to God that that was enough to keep him from waking up screaming. Exposing how much of a freak he was once was already well past his quota for the day. Katsuki hadn't expected Deku to come out with the rest of the class in the hot spring. The freak was always hiding away. He could lift a damn car, though, so Katsuki didn't know what he was so insecure about. Well, that was only half true. That's what he had let himself think. That's what he would say if anyone asked him. But part of him knew better. The part of him that he buried down as deep as he could knew what Deku was hiding. He knew what he had done, and he knew that it had certainly left its mark. He knew Deku was hiding the scar, but he didn't know why. He could completely ruin Katsuki's reputation. He could ruin his career. He could ruin his life, but he kept choosing not to, and he couldn't fathom why. So he did his best not to think about it at all. He couldn't ignore it when it was right in front of him, though. Half the class went silent when Deku walked out of the shower room, and the other half had caught on and shut up by the time he had settled himself shoulder deep in the pool. He heard people talking around him after a tense bout of silence, but it was just static in his ears. Vile, rose in his stomach at the sight of the stiff, twisting scar tissue covering the majority of Deku's right side. He didn't. There was no way he could have done that, right? No, there was a subtle distinction between the scar on his side and the blooming starburst pattern that ran from his lower ribs up his pec and down into his navel. That part was what Katsuki had done to him. His hands had put that scar on Deku's body. There was a brief moment of peace where he had no clue where the rest of the burns had come from, but then he remembered Deku's dad and his quirk. He knew Hisashi Midoriya was a deadbeat. He knew Deku had been scared of him damn near since they were in diapers. But he had never thought for a second that it could have been this bad. Katsuki didn't let his thoughts linger on that realization. He got out of the spring, grabbed his towel, and left before he made a fool of himself in front of everyone. He booked it to a random stall in the bathroom and willed himself to keep his dinner down. My life was hell. I did what I had to do to survive. Deku's words rang through his mind. What the hell did Hisashi do to him? Where was Auntie when that happened? How did Katsuki not know about this? When did it even happen? Was this why Deku came into school so damn vacant all the time? How many times had he hit Deku to snap him out of it? How many times had he gone home just to be hit again? The second leading cause of death in quirkless individuals is suicide. If someone is told they're worth less for long enough, they will believe they're worthless and act accordingly. God, he told him to kill himself. Did Hisashi say the same thing to him? Did he ever... Was that... He felt sick. Guilt hung heavy on his shoulders, and a spasm of his lungs clued him to the horrifying realization that there were tears trailing down his cheeks. He scrubbed them away quickly, even though no one was there to witness them. His mind was racing with a million different questions he never wanted to even think to ask. He felt like the scum of the earth, even though Deku was always the one looking down on him with his holier-than-thou bullshit. The worst part is that Deku was right to look down on him. Frick. Deku was right the whole time. So what did that make him? Kota couldn't understand these stupid wannabe heroes. Why the hell would anyone want to show off so badly that they were willing to die over it? As he stood watch on the wall, looking over the boys' side of the hot spring like Auntie Sasaki had told him to, he wondered how the whole world could be so freaking dumb. He had lost himself in his thoughts until all the boys went quiet. The sudden silence reminded him that he was meant to be keeping a lookout. Even still, he couldn't help but track the group's eyes to the green-haired boy who had just walked out. The boy was almost completely covered in scars. He could tell that much even from the distance he was sitting at. The other kid with the scar over his eye walked out behind him, and Kota wondered how those two especially could be so dumb. They obviously knew how messed up the world was, yet they were still here. The group was the last to come out and the last to go back in. Kota watched them the entire time, and his curiosity had only grown stronger. He was almost tempted to ask them what the heck they were thinking, but he knew better than to bother with that. Everyone always gave the same answers about the greater good or whatever, and he was tired of hearing it. Once everyone had left, he climbed down from his perch and vowed not to waste any more time thinking about those dumb, stupid idiots and their dumb, stupid choices. End of chapter.